All right, I'll kick us off. Thank you for joining, everyone. Good morning. Um, I am Eda. I'm the head of programs and impact, and we'll talk through the Summer 2026 funding round, which will be launching today, at 12 p.m., so very soon. Um, Before I jump into things, for those of you who've just joined, we are recording, and please stay on mute while I talk through the processes. It won't take long, and we'll have plenty of time for questions. I'm joined by Glen, one of our wonderful senior applicant consultants, which I'll refer to as SACs from now on. It's a really good opportunity to meet someone who reviews the applications, and I'll ask him to introduce himself in a minute. But before that, I just want to give a quick overview of the application process, and kind of the more general information before we open up to questions and get talking to Mark. So, I'm sure you're all familiar, but just by way of a quick recap, the Fore is the UK's only venture philanthropy fund. Our goal is to back small charities and social enterprises, and to date, we've given over 600 grants and almost £12 million. We support with more than just the grant funding. We also support partners with strategic support, so that could be workshops, skilled volunteers through our pro bono network, mentorship, and other courses. We're also really determined to give everyone feedback. So everyone who will be invited to apply will receive feedback. It depends how far in the process you've got. That will determine how much feedback you get, but we are determined to try and help everyone with that process. As I mentioned, today we're launching our Summer 2026 funding round. So at 12 p.m., the expression of interest will be opened. That will be open for a week. It closes next week.
Recording in progress.
Just mute that. It will be opened for a week. It closes at midday next week on the 1st of April. It's a very simple form. It takes 2 to 3 minutes. It's very simple questions. In terms of eligibility, our grants are open to registered charities, community interest companies, limited by guarantee, community benefit societies, that are either charitable CBSs or non-charitable CBSs with an asset lock. The other kind of criteria is that your annual revenue should be less than £500,000, and that means your last published financial accounts. If you don't have published financial accounts, then it's just kind of your last completed year. And if you don't have a last completed year, then it's your management accounts, essentially. We support applications from any location and any sector, but you do need to be registered in the UK. So you can be carrying out your work abroad, internationally, but you need to be registered as an entity in the UK. If you have any questions, of course, ask them here, but there's also an eligibility quiz on our website. Organisations can apply for up to £45,000 across 1 to 3 years. And once the registration closes next week on the 1st of April, we'll then let you know whether you've been invited to apply. If you have been invited to apply, then you'll get about 4 weeks to submit your application, and applications are due on Monday, 27th of April. This is all on our website, and I'll also share some slides at the end with kind of the key dates and a few of the key points summarizing the information, so don't worry too much, but yeah, just to go through the process. So in terms of the application, it's no more than 3 pages, answering some questions we've listed on the website, as well as your financials for the past 3 years if you have it, but definitely a forecast for the next 3 years to help us understand how the funding would be transformational. Where possible, we really encourage you to take stuff from other applications or other existing texts like your website, social media. We don't want you spending too long on these, but it is very important that you explain how the grant would help you achieve some kind of transformational change on the organization, not your beneficiaries. And I'll talk a bit more and go into this a bit later. But it's really to emphasize that this isn't an essay writing competition. But what I would recommend, and I'm sure you will do this anyway, but is getting a friend who doesn't know too much about your organization to read it through and make sure it makes sense, because I know we can often get in the weeds and use lots of jargon. In addition to the transformational change, which I'll talk about in a second, the other thing we look out for is strength of leadership. So again, this is all on our website. And we know that we are inviting very small charities, and that's really what we want to encourage. So we recognize that there are constraints and there are challenges, so don't worry too much about those. But we are looking to understand how the funding could help you overcome those challenges or unlock potential to overcome those challenges. So one example might be that you might be historically volunteer-led, and now you want to use the funding for your first paid role to unlock some strategic thinking on income diversification. Um, it's really important to tell a story. I think that's one of the key things is kind of threading that narrative of what your challenges are, what the funding will unlock, and how that will unlock sustained transformation. In terms of the process and the different stages, so once you've been invited to apply, there's the stage one, which is an initial review. So we have consultants like Mark to review applications and shortlist of the top 30%. And our SACs, our consultants, have a range of experience, and we'll hear from Mark shortly about his. And again, every applicant will receive written feedback. Um, and it's really important because the majority of the organizations that end up getting funding from us will have applied to us before, taken on feedback, and then come back having incorporated that. The stage two, once that's been shortlisted to about 30%, is about a 45-minute, 1 hour call with their kind of designated consultant. And that's to understand the proposal, ask questions. It's also intended to be helpful for you guys, give a fresh perspective, a bit of a critical friend, maybe some strategic advice, as much as is possible in that 1 hour call. And then those who are successful refine their proposal with their consultant and are brought to panel for the final decision making. And again, there's feedback throughout. Just to let you know that we're running 2 funding rounds this summer, one national funding round, which is kind of our normal main program, and one Northwest funding round. The Northwest funding round is only for organisations based in the northwest of England, so Cheshire, Cumbria, Greater Manchester, Lancashire, and Merseyside. You can only register for one funding round. If you submit multiple, we'll sift through and accept one in the interest of fairness. So don't worry too much about which one, but where possible, if you know you're for the Northwest round, please do apply for that one. And then one last bit, I know I've kind of sped through this, but I really want to make time for questions, is I just want to share a bit more about transformational impact. So let me just share my screen. Hopefully you can all see the slides. I get a nod or yeah, great. So just to emphasize about the transformational impact, because this is something we get asked about a lot, and hopefully this is helpful. But again, please do ask any kind of follow-up or specific questions. We are interested in organizational development, not beneficiary need. And this might be a bit of a switch up from other applications, but that's really important. That's really important to keep in mind when you're kind of telling that story and talking about the transformational change. And the way that we think about transformational change are these kind of 4 different areas. It's not to say that these are the only areas, and it's not to say that you have to hit all of those areas or 3 of those areas. It's really just a guiding framework to help you think about what that might look like. So the first one is scale. So this could be that the funding is used to provide resources and infrastructure needed to allow the organization to grow. So like I said, employing staff. And because we recognize there's such a range of organizations and sizes that we're inviting to apply, don't worry too much about kind of whether yours will stack up in terms of the number of people you support. It's more about kind of if we think about percentage growth in terms. So we would consider one that's expanding their reach from 20 to 40 people just as much as we would consider someone who's expanding from 200 to 400 people. We understand that depth is also really important. The other one is sustainability. So it could be that one of you uses the funding to place the organization in a strong position to face expected and unexpected challenges. So maybe wanting to develop new income streams. The other one is structure. So it could be that the funding is used for structural changes such as, like I said, moving from being volunteer-led to employee-run. And the other one we have there is efficiency. It can be used to make systems more efficient, so increasing admin support, implementing a client relationship management system or a better IT system. Like I said, you don't have to hit all of them, but do make sure that whatever kind of transformational narrative is core to the story you're telling. And the other key thing is to really make sure you think about the sustainability of that transformation, and how you plan to make sure that that continues past the grant period. And then we've got some key dates there, which are also on the website, and I'll also share these slides. But without further ado, let me just stop sharing and introduce Mark. So Mark, thank you for joining. It would be great if you could introduce yourself, talk a bit about your background and what you enjoy about being in SAC.
Thank you, Eda, and welcome everyone. Yes, as Eda says, I'm one of this SAC team, and our job is obviously to assess applications that are submitted and then work with you to take those applications, hopefully, to the potential of funding. So alongside that, I have 3 consultancies with small NGOs in the UK, helping them on their journeys. But really, prior to that, I suppose for 25 years, I was a founding trustee and then chief executive of a UK charity that worked in Southern and Eastern Africa. And we took that from startup to working in 5 countries in Southern and Eastern Africa and raising over £1.5 million a year. So I have all that to say is I have a real deep understanding and empathy for the journey you're on and the challenges and steps that you have to take at each point in that journey. In terms of what I like about the Fore, well, firstly, obviously, I really like the focus on this organizational aspect. This transformation part is often the hardest pound to find on your journey, when so many other funders are focused just on program. And I guess the real kind of joy for me is meeting you, committed people who are addressing an issue. And as I said, I have a real understanding of what that feels like. But getting to know you and getting to know all sorts of different courses has been, it's been a joy. So thank you.
Thanks, Mark. And then I know we're going to get lots of questions on this, or I hope we do, but can you share a bit about what you look for when you review applications and what transformation looks like to you?
Yes, I think you kind of put it really well in that slide. I suppose from the transformation piece is the key, and it is about the organization, not the kind of, if you like, the growth in beneficiaries. That should be if the transformation part of it is correct on the organization, and that can be to do with your capacity or bringing in a new pathway for your organization, but the beneficiary growth should be a natural byproduct of that. So I think that's quite a mindset change when often we're applying just for program funding where they're more interested in impact and beneficiary and everything else. So that's the first mindset change that I think we look to see is are you requesting something that will take your organization on a kind of different pathway or a new pathway or a step change to achieving that as a byproduct. And then I suppose the other thing is, from my perspective, keep it simple. Everything you do, whether it's about your management, your organization, your financial system, all this transformation, keep it simple, concise, and kind of, I like Eda's thing about get someone to read it. Does it feel compelling? And does it feel sustainable, of course, in terms of what you're asking for? Do you think, is there evidence that that can be sustained after this grant is finished?
Great, thank you, Mark. That's really helpful. We already have our first question in the chat, but I also want to open it up. So feel free to unmute, put your hand up, or chuck a question in the chat. But yes, open to questions. The first question we have from Helen is how are the applicants chosen, please? So from expressions of interest to applications, it's by random selection. That's to make sure that we're not inviting too many people to apply. This is the number of grants we can get. I think there's
God.
somebody sneezing, bless you. Um, and then it's the shortlisting through the consultants. At the final decision stage, what typically separates organizations that get funded from those that don't, assuming both have strong impact? It's a really good question, and it really varies kind of panel to panel in that final stage. Be interested to hear your opinion, Mark, but I would say that in my experience, it's essentially the more, because they're all strong at that point, you're right. It's essentially kind of who has either the most potential for impact in their organization, kind of the most transformational change, and or who has the most kind of thought through proposal. So you definitely get some applications that are a bit more early stage or a bit more I suppose, a bit more vague in terms of ideas versus others that have kind of ideas for leads or ideas for diversifying income, things like that. Mark, anything to add on that?
Yeah, I think you've said it well, Eda. The truth is, when you get down to that final stage, they're all good applications. In a perfect world, we could fund all of them. So it does come down to kind of very small equations, and often that's around what you've just said is, can we see a sort of, if this grant is given, can we see that sort of compelling, evidenced, and sustainable change that this grant would help you achieve? And can we see in you a real sense of confidence and kind of well thought through kind of determination that this would make this change for your organization?
Yeah, thank you.
But it's fine margins.
It is. Victoria asks, hi there, I work with an organization whose usual turnover is under 500K, but due to a large capital grant for a building project, last year's accounts take them well over this. Would they still be eligible on basis that is not revenue income and was exceptional? So unfortunately, we do kind of draw a hard line at that in terms of your last published accounts need to be under 500K. I recognize that there are kind of situations like yours, but it's tough to kind of capture that nuance across the board when we're dealing with such amounts of applications. So you wouldn't be eligible for this year's, but then if it kind of levels out to normal, then it would be next year's. Can we apply for assistance with fundraising development, for example, a consultant or workshops? As in use the full grant for fundraising development, is what I understand. Is that right, Mark?
Um, Are you talking to me, Eda?
Oh, I was just checking. Sorry, that's confusing. The person who asked it is also called Mark. I don't know if you can, I assume that's what you mean, in which case, yes, Mark, do you, oh,
Provide us with support for fundraising, not necessarily finance, but actually, advice and support in that sort of that sense.
Yes, I can answer that. I think you would have to. I think it's this question around if it's sort of just for the purpose of business as usual, or just. I think that would be harder to get through. But if it's seeking that support because you have a specific target or challenge in mind, and by doing this, what I would say is you'd have to have a real clear understanding of why you're seeking that fundraising support beyond just business as usual.
and what I would add to that is that typically the ones that are more likely to be successful is when you have at least some sense of what that plan looks like. So there's kind of been some initial research or some initial feelers to understand ideas or scope, and it's not just kind of bringing someone into parachute and figure it all out.
Yes, that's a really good addition, Eda. I think it's, yes, having a plan for why you're doing it and where it takes you.
Thanks, Mark. I'm gonna take a break from the chat and go to Saida. Is that how you pronounce it?
Please, thank you very much. I was reading a little bit about the funding just before I came on, and I noticed that what appealed to me was that there would be support from people like Mark, to help us in the strategy and the growth. And what I wanted to know was, will you be with us? Because I think the funding is for 1 to 3 years. So if we went for the 3 years, would we be able to rely on someone from the Fore to help us, to strategize and continue our journey in the 3 years, or will it just be at the beginning?
It's a really good question. So typically it's just at the beginning. There are some cases where kind of the consultant builds a relationship and gets more involved, but that's kind of separate to their role as the strategic applicant consultant. But if you are successful in the funding round, then you can access also our pro bono network and skilled volunteers. And actually, as part of the proposal that you've finalized with the consultant, one of the parts is identifying what areas of support you might need. So that might be kind of strategic, or it might be fundraising or something else. And that's something you can then look for in the pool of volunteers. But it might also be that that consultant is the right fit for you. Mark, anything to add from your experience on the last round?
No, I think it's that pro bono support network that if you are successful with the grant, you do get access to what is a very comprehensive kind of pro bono network. So yes, there's plenty of kind of support you can look towards on that journey.
Excellent. That's really what I wanted to hear. Thank you.
Thanks, Aida. Joy?
Hello, yes, thank you. One of my questions was very similar to the last one, but I do have a couple more, if that's okay. First of all, thank you so much for this opportunity. It's great to have an opportunity to go face to face with some people for some extra help and advice. We're a small community centre, town centre community centre, and we have a dementia-friendly cafe, and we run wellbeing activities in our hall. And we see a lot of social isolation, and one of our aims is to improve connection, confidence, and overall well-being in a safe and welcoming place. We're really interested in becoming more sustainable and strengthening how we deliver and grow our impact. So knowing that our work does reduce isolation and supports well-being, it's obviously hard to measure. What's the best way to demonstrate this kind of preventative health impact in an application?
Sorry, I lost my mouse there. That's a really good question. I would say, well, I don't know, Mark, do you have something off the top, or otherwise I can...
No, why didn't you start? I'll follow.
Yeah, so I would say, because that is something we recognize, that especially if you're early stage, that, yeah, you just don't have, I mean, first of all, these things are hard to measure, but also you don't have the capacity to measure them. So I would say that what is helpful in terms of impact is showing the demand for services. And, I think that kind of retainment or referrals and just showing how much people value them, I think is quite strong in itself with impact if you're unable to collect kind of more robust data around it.
Okay, thank you. I do have a couple more questions, but obviously I'll wait my turn if there are.
No worries. Yeah, Mark, did you have anything to add to that one?
I think it's the evidence behind it. I mean, I think everyone recognizes, and I remember there's a time at which that kind of collection of data is a very kind of difficult, but knowing, I think that probably right, look for, give us evidence of why you're there and what the demand is, and you'll have some anecdotal evidence, so include that, and if we get through to, the SAC can then work with you in terms of trying to extract meaningful data to put into a report. But yes.
Yeah, it's a really good point, yeah.
Okay. Thank you. Can I come back in with any more, or will you call me back in later?
Yes, of course. You've used your ticket. No, that's fine. Yeah. I'll just do a few more from the chat. So when is the Northwest funding round? Is it the same period? Yes, it is the same period. What's roughly the acceptance rate for applications? If you're asking about the random allocation, it really varies round to round depending on how many grants we can give out. When you are evidencing long-term sustainability, can you give thoughts on what you are looking for? That's a good question. Mark, anything off the top of your head for that one?
Well, I think in terms of this grant, to be really specific, I mean, obviously, as an overview, when we look at your organisation, there'll be a general discussion around the current sustainability, but particularly on the grant, I suppose one of the questions we must kind of assess is, having given the grant, how will you continue whatever that grant's for beyond that funding period? And that's probably the critical part of sustainability is, does this create a long-term step change or a short-term?
Yeah, absolutely. Oh, don't know why mine's so echoey. Sorry about that. Yes, just to, I guess, really emphasize there in terms of the sustainability, I think the piece is where there is obviously, and this will most often be the case, where there's kind of a cost implied with that shift and an ongoing cost. It's really knowing how the grant will help sustain that ongoing cost. So the question you need to ask yourself is how will that transformation be financially sustained after the grant period is over? And hopefully you can explain that. I'm gonna go on to do a couple more of the chat questions because I think there's quite a few building up. What are the rules on previous applicants? We've not got it twice. Is that a problem? I'm sorry, Cheryl. That's not a problem at all. There's no kind of rules. I would say that just make sure you're incorporating any feedback. And I think we do want to start a process of identifying those who've applied quite a few times and not gotten it, and just kind of talking them through what can be done, or whether maybe it's just not the right grant for them, and just making sure that we're kind of being a bit more proactive about that. But currently, no, there's no rules on previous applicants. Do you consider applications seeking funds to help with expanding capacity, i.e. a need for a new position on the organization due to the growth of the charity? Do you want to take that one, Mark? Any thoughts?
Yes, I think probably the critical part of that is what's the position for, and does it take the organisation in a new direction or a step change in that direction, or is it part of just an ongoing plan? I think the point of this grant is to look at something in more in terms of a step change than just a business as usual growth.
Yeah, 100%. I think that's spot on. In the criteria, it says that we need reserves, but we are just arriving at the end of our first year, having received a very modest amount of income through grants and donations. Will this prevent us from applying? Absolutely not. There's a number of applicants who get through to final stages and also get the grants, who have very little reserves or are very new. I guess the thing I would say is to acknowledge that, and that probably I wouldn't recommend using the grant to build those reserves exclusively, but have it as part of the narrative to say it will unlock this transformation, and as part of that, it will put us in a better position to build reserves. So at least you're acknowledging it and building it into the narrative, but it's not kind of the focal point. What would you say, Mark?
Totally agree. I'm not sure this grant is, I think reserves are important and we do look at those, but the level of reserves is very different to different organisations depending on what they're doing and whether they're part funded. But yes, in terms of I don't think this grant is meant just to help you achieve a higher level of reserves.
Thank you. Yeah. The next one in the chat is, how do you assess the financial sustainability of the organisations that apply? Mark, do you have thoughts on that, or I can speak first?
Yeah, I think, you're asked to fill in a table. That will give us a high level view of your income journey, your expense journey, your level of reserves. We also look at I think you're asked to submit a set of audited accounts or your latest set of accounts. And that, I suppose, it's just an assessment around, is it coherent? Is it transparent? Are there any kind of sort of big holes in it that need explanation? So I suppose my encouragement is, if your financial journey in that table has a couple of sort of visual glitches in it, just provide a brief narrative as to why.
Yeah, absolutely. And I guess just to build on from that, in terms of then the forecast, so we ask for 3 years of forecast based on the assumption that you get the grant. And again, don't worry too much about this, because it is something that gets worked out with the consultant if you get through to the later stage. But one thing that's helpful is just making sure those narratives kind of tie together. So if you're saying we're going to use the grant in year 1 for then an X amount of income in year 2, just making sure that that reflects to show how that sustainability is shifting.
Yes, we would have a discussion about, if you've made a forecast, why have you made it? What's the evidence for it? So yes, there will be an assessment on that, but we can work together on that.
Yeah. Beyond strong impact data, what makes an application stand out as compelling and memorable to your panel? It's a great question. Mark, any idea?
Honestly, simplicity. If the panel can, you have to remember, the panel haven't got a lot of time to spend reading this. We're there to represent your organisation, but if each section of it, so if your reason for applying for the grant is compelling, and it's simple and it's easy to understand, and easy to understand the journey you're trying to go on, and then has the sort of, if you like, the additional evidence of sustainability, well-run organisation. But yes, it sounds odd, but the more simple you can make this, the clearer you can make it, the more effective it is at that moment.
Yeah, agreed. And I think what I would add, which might sound contradictory, but is that there's kind of a criteria around X factor. And so it's really anything that what stands out is kind of something that sounds different or sounds exciting. So any kind of idea that is, I will say any applications where you're hoping to get fundraising support to unlock more grant funding is less likely to be funded than something where you're unlocking like a new income stream or a new type of dependency or becoming independent altogether. And it's kind of that creativity which is helpful. But telling that, like Mark said, as simply as possible. And I think a lot of places where applications aren't successful is either kind of not telling that story in sequence, and then it's really hard to follow. So it's kind of, what is the challenge? What is the idea? How does that unlock? And then how is it sustained? And really making sure that's easy to follow throughout.
And also, brave is not a negative. So sometimes people have got to panel because they are attempting to try something quite new, but they've got the evidence that backs up and supports that sort of bravery. I think, there is an element of venture capital in this. So don't be concerned if what you're putting forward is a relatively untested proposition, as long as you have the confidence and the supporting evidence for why you want to do it.
Absolutely. Would you consider funding an organization who have just started developing a new funding stream? I mean, I think similar to our previous answers, I'd say yes. It's just, again, about building that narrative. And I suppose with this one, it's a little bit different, Mark. I'd be interested to hear what you say, but in terms of if you've already started developing it, kind of where is that impact of this grant specifically? Or is it just, or it could seem like it's just helping you along a journey that you're already going on.
I think that's right. I think that's right. I think there's there'll always be an assessment made as to whether you are going to do this anyway. It's already part of your business strategy, and if that's going to be less likely, then this is something you haven't started yet, but you've got all the evidence as to why you want to start it, and you've got some really good projections as to what it'll create for your organization if you do it. But yes, if there is a sense and a sort of financially backing that says this is the journey we're on, and we just want to do that journey quicker, that's probably less likely to get on.
Great, thanks, Mark. Worry that you're hearing our voices too much. So if anybody wants to jump in and say the question or anything else, feel free. But otherwise, we can continue with those in the chat.
May I ask a question?
Of course, yes.
John Woodfield from Monmouthshire. Hi, Edna. Hi, Mark. I'm feeling rather overwhelmed by this. I represent as chair of the trustees for Together Works. And in the last 8 days, we've just received our charitable status approval. So we're on the journey. And seeing a chap like Mark there, who's got so much experience in this, just a baby in arms here, but very conscious of the responsibility within this, most certainly, because we are having issues with trying to fund staff. So my question was, and not denigrating this opportunity because it's magnificent, but I'm at a loss to think where else one could go, given that if our application, because everyone will be very, very worthy of that, I'm sure. Sadly, I'm leaving this meeting to go and have a conversation with somebody that we have to lose because of that funding issue, which is going to be difficult. So I suppose my question is there access to this again later on? Because I think I need to share a lot of these questions and a lot of the understanding with others to ensure that I don't blow it on behalf of the group. So will there be a feedback session, or indeed will I be able to see all this information later on so I can share and we can ensure we give it our best shot?
Yeah, absolutely, John. And sorry, it's been so tough. That's a tough conversation to have. But yes, we will be sharing this recording and the slides. There's also we'll also signpost where you can find the information on the website. There's a big FAQs, which is really helpful, and I definitely encourage everyone to read through. And then if you have any questions while you're applying, just kind of any logistical or technical ones, feel free to pop us an email as well.
Okay, great. So thank you very much indeed.
Thanks, John.
And I would just add quickly that, I think the job of an SAC, if you apply and get through to that, is to help you work through that. So I would encourage you to tell your story in terms of what the cause and what you're trying to do and where you're trying to go. And out of that, hopefully we can help sort of scribe what you're requesting for. But yes, I think timing is everything on this, and you may find a future round you'll be in a better place to make a more effective application. But please don't be discouraged about entering the job of an SAC is to work with you.
Okay, great. Thank you very much indeed. Thank you.
Thanks both. We'll go to Joy, then Vanessa, then back to the questions in the chat. Joy?
Thank you. I got two questions. One is around governance and the other is around structure. At the moment, we've probably got an even mix of volunteers and part-time staff, committed volunteers, I will add, which, listening to what I've said already, we could be looking at a change of structure and have more paid to make that totally more sustainable, maybe. How could we reassure that our current model of using volunteers is sustainable and not a risk before we change the structure to a more staff-led?
I presume you feel it is a risk.
No, I wouldn't say so. I'm just thinking of succession planning, probably.
Or is it a question of having a both-and strategy?
Yeah.
And I
Yes.
think that's the point in terms of putting together your request. It's kind of laying out why you believe this change is necessary.
Yeah.
But then on top of that, what's key to this application is what does that achieve for you as an organization?
Okay, that's helpful. Thank you. And then the other one is the governance. So our charity is committee led. What governance practices matter the most to the Fore?
It's a good question. I mean, the thing that we really try to encourage is exactly being community-led, kind of leaders with lived experience, especially. And I mean, beyond that, I mean, we talk about leadership, strength of leadership, and part of that is having the relevant skill set in the board or in management. So especially if you're working in something that's more technical or specific, making sure that those safeguards are in place by having that expertise. But otherwise, it's mostly the lived experience and kind of that relevant experience.
Okay, thank you.
Thanks. Vanessa?
Hi there. Thank you very much. I'm calling from CPRW, which is the Campaign for the Protection of Rural Wales. So we are a kind of campaigning organisation. And I just wanted to circle back to this idea of demonstrating sustainability beyond the funding period, because I suppose as a fundraiser, that just to me means, you employ more sort of income generation type activities, and then you will get a more diversified and sustainable organisation. So do you have any examples of past charities that you've supported to give us an idea of, if it's not just employer fundraiser, what else is there, sort of thing, to demonstrate that sustainability beyond the funding period?
Yeah, it's a good question. One thing that is maybe helpful, I'll try and think of some examples off the top of my head. But one thing that is example is on our website, we do have a section on all grants awarded, and they're just really short snippets and bios of previous successful grants with kind of what they've spent, what they're planning to spend the money on. So I would say that the big ones we see are, and I think this is maybe relevant to a question we've seen in the chat, is that there's an organization that's had ideas of a corporate packaging that they want to give, so some kind of training associated to the work they do. They've just never had the headspace or the capacity to really think that through and create it and develop it. Another one is thinking through corporate partnerships. Or perhaps just being inundated with kind of bigger partnerships, that kind of grants, kind of commissions, whether that's with football academies or schools. And so it's still perhaps kind of along the lines of grant funding, but kind of more consistent and bigger and slightly just more reliable. So those are some things off the top of my head. Mark, I don't know if you've got any.
Well, I suppose, yes, I suppose from a recent round we did, probably the example I would use is there was an organisation who provided access to sport for children and young people who wouldn't have accessed it at all. And they were sort of a part-funded role. They had sort of subscriptions and stuff like that. But they'd got to a point where they had clear evidence that the success of this model, they had so many other opportunities that were ready to go. They just didn't have the capacity to release it. And so their request was for a dedicated ops person. And as a result of that, they could clearly show how they could suddenly take that big leap into the next. And there lay the sustainability as well, because in many ways, they had the onward road, they just didn't have the ability to get to it. So I suppose that's a good example of how a grant from the Fore could help an organisation just make that step. And actually that step would lead to a growing programme and sustainability.
Because they were offering their services then, they were sort of selling their Is that what you
Well,
mean?
yes, it was one of those subsidised working with local schools. But the key part of this related to you is terms of trying to demonstrate sustainability was that they could show that the grant would enable them to make a step, and the step would automatically lead to a bigger program, more income coming in, and thereby they could then afford to keep the ops person beyond the grant funding. So that's a
Brilliant.
capacity example, really. But yeah.
Great. Thanks ever so much. Thank you.
Thanks both. Paul, I'm just worried about the questions building up, so we'll go to a few of those if that's okay, and then I'll come back to you. Can we use some funding to build our own website? Yes, as long as it fits into that narrative of unlocking transformational change, and if it's a part of the story, that's fine. But yeah, just one thing we would recommend is tying into what Mark was saying about keeping it simple is try to avoid listing a shopping list of lots of things that you want, but really make it a tight narrative that all fits together. Can we use the funding to rent a studio for our CIC to move out of homes and be able to work with our artists in a more work setting? Again, yes, just as long as it's telling that story of transformational change and what it would mean. And then also in particular with this is the sustainability piece, because one of the big things there is how do you then sustain the rent past the grant period. I'm gonna try and blast through some of these, Mark, but feel free to jump in if there are any. Within the application, can you submit a video or a flipbook to further support the application? Currently not. I think maybe we experimented with a video a while back before my time, but essentially it's just really tricky to kind of make fair and to do at scale. So currently it's just an application. If you do have accessibility needs, you can email us and we'll sort that out separately. But as the default, it's the 3-page application. Will I have access to recording as my link didn't work initially? Hopefully, yes. We should send that in a follow-up email. But if you still have issues, just let us know and we'll figure that out. There's a big push across the sector around income diversification being the answer to sustainability, but the reality for us is that building something like our business ambassador program or corporate income takes proper upfront investment in people, relationships, and credibility before it generates any income. So how does the Fore look at funding requests that are about building the future sustainability, like freeing up senior lived experience leadership time to get something like this off the ground, rather than delivering immediate outputs? And how do you think about the longer term return on... I don't know if it's been cut off, but I think I get the gist of that question. Mark, do you want to, I know we've talked a bit about this, but is there anything else you want to add?
I guess it's the evidence in terms of the work you have done to look at why that channel is and it could become an effective channel for you in terms of raising sustainable funds. So yes, really understanding why you think that's a good channel, what research you've already done. Yeah, it's proving really that is a viable plan and also a real opportunity for an organisation and a cause like yours.
Yeah, and I think the other thing is that we recognize it's a bit of a catch-22 where it's saying, you're kind of asking for the funding to build this out, and we're saying, well, you need to have scoped it, and you're like, well, I need the money to scope it. So we get that. And I think it's just about having that balance and I guess just acknowledging that the competition it's a highly competitive grant. And so sometimes what kind of edges people over is that having at least just talked to their community and gotten a warm leads list, or talked to the community and gotten a sense of numbers of how many would take up a paid membership. So it really doesn't have to be something robust, but it's just knowing that there is something behind the idea that lends it credibility. And the other thing I would say is that when you're, and this is a relatively, I would say, common application that is quite successful, is bringing in kind of delivery support to open up leadership and strategic time. So I think that's a good thing to ask for if that's relevant. But I guess the add-on to that is making sure that you've thought through, and again, this can be refined with the consultant, but what that looks like you're saying, it can take time, and acknowledging that in the split you ask for, because sometimes we see people asking for almost the full grant in the first year, and that's a much harder, unless there's kind of stats and research behind it, but it's much harder to reassure that you'll be able to make that money to sustain it after 1 year of kind of testing, piloting, and delivering. So just considering that in the narrative you tell. Paul, you put your hand down. Was it answered, or?
That was my ridiculously long-winded and for some reason bold question in the chat. I don't know why it came through as bold, but no, But basically, it was trying to ensure that you guys are able to distinguish between what looks like something we're already doing, because if we think it's a good idea, we're going to do it, and then also what is a transition and a step up, because this organisation has existed for 9 years, and I've only been the CEO for 6 months. And I do have lived experience of the subject matter. So it's like it represents a real shift in focus for us to diversify income, promote lived experience leadership. But I guess if we pitch our business ambassador model as the example that we need funding for, to free up my time to really focus on getting that off the ground, we could already focus on it passively and bring in some income, but to really make it a success, we need that support that the Fore can thankfully offer. It's just making that distinction between, like, we don't want it to be read as something that we're already doing, because we're kind of doing it passively at the moment because we don't have the resource. So.
Yeah, I'd encourage you to make the ambassador then your big pitch. You know,
Okay.
if you believe that's the journey that's going to create a step change and explain what that step change enables for the organisation, then yes, you know, asking for a grant that affords you dedicated time to really create an effective and committed ambassador part to your business is a relevant application. It's just, it's giving a sense of why you think the ambassador program is the thing that will transform that.
Thank you so much, man. Thank you.
Thanks, Paul. Maureen asks, the work of my CIC is informed by robust research as part of a PhD. Would this be accepted? The work of my CIC is informed by... I'm not sure I understand the question. Mark, do you? Or Maureen, do you want to come off mute and explain a bit more?
Yeah, I think probably what...
Okay, I'm sorry if that wasn't very clear. I did some research, adopted an engaged approach, so really got embedded in the ecosystem within which I'm supporting, which is business entrepreneurs, and based on sort of focus groups, interviews, all of those sorts of things, I've got a wealth of data. So would that sort of data be accepted in terms of it really focused on what are the unmet needs of this group and how are they best addressed?
Am I right in thinking you work for this organisation? And
founded this organisation.
You founded the organisation, and you have a lot of data that's informing what you want to do next.
Yes.
That's absolutely fine. It's the what next and why that
absolutely.
Yeah.
Okay. Thank you.
Thanks both. We have a question from Sam. Would sustainability and transformation include succession planning with staff and income generation? Yes, I believe so. I mean, it's harder to say without kind of the details, but yes, definitely. I don't know if you had an experience of seeing one of those in your applications, Mark.
No.
Very helpful, Ionoa. Thank you. This is Ionoa from our team. If you have not already taken a look at our website, she shared the frequently asked questions link. John has a question for you, Mark. In your experience, where else would or could you seek support for the funding of staff, as most appear to be project-led? I would ask personally, but don't have access to hands up. Oh, okay, or it's my poor understanding of Zoom.
If I'm right in understanding the question, outside of the Fore grant?
I think so, yes.
Yeah, tough. It's unrestricted funding, and that's always been that's partly what I like about the Fore grant, is it is focused on the funding that's hard to find. yeah, I mean, there's a whole host of ways you can seek to try and build up that income, but there's no easy fix on that.
Thanks, Mark. Dave asks, working in an open access youth organisation in South Wales, would it be better to ask to fund a basic project or to employ youth workers, a person to continue to apply and work on sustainability? I'm not sure I understand that question. Dave, do you want to elaborate a bit more?
Yeah.
Oh, you're back on mute, I think.
Yeah, it's difficult to write stuff down as you're thinking of it, isn't it? No, we've got a fairly successful youth group running in a small community in South Wales. And what I'm looking to do is to build the capacity of that group. Now, sustainability is always an issue. And what we've run into recently, or what we've identified recently, is that, you know, as a lot of the other people have said here, you need a specific person to be able to go and look at lots of different income streams. It may be funding, it may be income, maybe social value, it may be lots of different things, but you know, you need a dedicated person. And what I was asking, because I hadn't listened to, I came in late and I hadn't heard everything that was going on, was would it be better to ask for a basic sort of youth workers as a project funding type thing, or would it be better to ask for that sustainability person to build something for the future? You know, there's quite a bit of evidence that we could access quite a, you know, money from social value, etc., from people around the area, but we need a person to be able to do that. So I think I know the answer to the question now, but at the time when I put it on there, sorry, Mark, I sort of put it on there as a I hadn't heard a lot of what the comments were.
No problem at all. And I think on the basis that the grant focuses more on organisational development, that would suggest you should focus on making, you know, looking at something that will truly help, you know, take your organisation on, but just be aware that probably this particular grant is more about seeking something that will be a step change, not just a business as usual gradual. So have a think about, if you brought this person on, what's the reason, and how does that take you from where you are today to where you want to be tomorrow and create that lasting impact. I think that's probably, out of the two you've mentioned, the one you should focus on.
Okay, thank you, Mark.
Thanks both. Wary of time, I know that some of you will have to hop off. I'm happy to stay back to answer a few more questions. But before some of you have to jump off, I just wanted to I had some top tips or kind of the common pitfalls. And again, these are in the slides and I'll send them over. But the first one is, do stick to the 3 pages. I know it can be hard, and I know you know, there's a lot to explain, but in light of fairness, we can't prioritize applications that go beyond that. So do stick to that. Make sure you've answered all the questions on the website, so you can check this. And what I would recommend is, once you've drafted it, it's ready for submission, is just quickly do a checklist against the questions on the website, because sometimes they can be missed. I know we've said this lots of times, focus on the transformational impact of your organization, not your beneficiaries. Tell a story. And lastly, I would recommend checking out the FAQs that I know are shared in the link. There's some, probably if you thought it, then it's been asked and answered in there. And if not, pop us an email if you're unsure. Thank you to those of you who have to hop off, but happy to stay on. Mark, I don't know if you've got a bit more time.
Yes, I can stay on, no problem.
Okay, great. Kevin, do you want to ask your question, and then we'll try and blast through the rest of the chat questions?
Yeah, thank you so much, both. Really, really insightful discussion. I've got 2 questions. I'll try and keep them short. The first is from your, and they're in a chat, but because I have to shoot off, I wanted to just quickly ask them. From your perspective, what does a genuinely transformational grant look like in practice for an organization, for a small but growing charity? And what are the strongest examples you've seen? And then I'll ask the follow-up after that.
Hard question. Some of the strongest examples, I suppose, one example that, I mean, we've had, actually, yes, we've had a couple of calls. So one example perhaps to look at is there's a charity called Omni Music who they basically, I mean, they make music accessible to people with disabilities. And they use the grant to, I believe, if I remember correctly, is bring in a bit more capacity support at the delivery level so that senior leadership can spend more time on the ideas around basically packaging training for corporates and building those corporate partnerships, and working more with schools. So they had a lot of interest from schools, they just didn't have the capacity to deliver it. And they've really gone from strength to strength. There's another one who are a youth, they focus on youth in their environment, so engaging youth in kind of rewilding. And they were starting to get approached or thinking about how to work with, and again, this is super niche, but it all kind of speaks to the same idea of they were engaging with kind of property developers looking into how to make their property more environmentally friendly. And so again, it was exploring this opportunity of an alternative income stream and different types of partnerships. But again, it was bringing in the delivery focus so that leadership could do it. And I guess that's one important distinction, is that often what we see is that the best person to fundraise is often the leaders, because you do it well and because you have that passion. So if you are wanting to bring in somebody else to fundraise, there needs to be an angle as to why that person or why that particular plug and that person would be the best plug for it, I guess is my advice there. Mark, anything?
That's super. And Mark, I guess you can maybe answer the first part of the question, which was, and I guess it kind of links, but what does a genuinely transformational grant look like in practice for a small but growing charity?
I would say the key word in this is, does it unlock something for you? So, transformation, it doesn't matter your size, whether you are 50,000 a year or 450,000 a year. Does the application unlock something for the organization rather than just continue, accelerate or continue its journey? Do you have is this something that can truly unlock a new pathway, a new way of doing something? And I come back to that example I gave. What it did was unlock their access to new different types of sport. It gave the CEO a chance to really focus on building partnerships, and that's what I mean. Look at the application, and when you read it, does it unlock something for the organization rather than build something?
That's super helpful. Thank you so much. My last question was, how do you typically view funding requests? So this has been kind of touched upon, but how do you typically view funding requests for capacity building, such as hiring key roles or investing in systems versus direct program delivery? So I think this has been kind of touched upon, but anything different now hasn't been shared.
I guess it's why, and what's the purpose, and where does that take you in terms of that key person, or and again, come back to that point. Is it something that you're going to do anyway, or is this a key person that takes you in that different direction?
Thank you so much.
Thanks both. Really wary of time, so I'm and also that some of the questions in the chat are from half an hour ago, so we probably have answered them. So just gonna have a quick scan through. I suppose there was one I saw. With regards to a 3-year forecast, is none still here? Because that might be quite specific. Don't think so. I think if you have a specific question that hasn't been answered, feel free to pop us an email at info@thefore.org. We also have the FAQs, as I've mentioned, and I know has shared the link and also the Who We Fund page. But do we want to, Joy, do you want to round us up on the last question?
Yeah, just very, very quickly. I know I've had a few. I think you said from selection, the selection from registration to confirmation of a place on the funding round is random? Totally random? By area? By whatever? No, totally random.
Well, except for because we're running 2 rounds this summer, so we've got the Northwest one, so those will be prioritized to kind of proportionately, but otherwise totally random.
Okay, thank you.
All right. Okay, yes, please pop us a question at info@thefore.org if yours hasn't been answered. But yes, we'll share the slides, we'll share the recording. Thank you so much for joining today, and good luck. I have to hop off to help open the registration. All right, thanks, and thank you, Mark, for joining, and thank you, Eda.
Bye, Eda. Bye, everyone.
Everyone.